The day started like any other. My alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., and I rolled out of bed to get ready for work. Sarah, my wife of 8 years, was still asleep, her dark hair spilling across the pillow. She looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos of the world. I kissed her cheek softly before heading out, my mind already on the mountain of tasks waiting for me at the office. Sarah worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which I envied on days like this when the grind felt endless. By the time I got back that evening, it was past 7 p.m., and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, but that wasn't unusual. Sometimes she got wrapped up in her projects and lost track of time. I dropped my keys on the counter and headed to the bedroom to change. That's when I saw it. Something that didn't belong. A man's leather jacket draped over the back of the chair by Sarah's desk. It wasn't mine. My stomach twisted as I picked it up, feeling the weight of the supple leather in my hands. There was a faint musky scent clinging to it, distinctly masculine. For a moment, I stared at it, my mind racing. Had Sarah bought it? No, she'd never mentioned anything like this. Maybe it was a gift for someone? But why would she leave it out like this? Sarah walked into the room, startling me. She was holding a glass of wine, her expression casual, too casual. Her cheeks flushed slightly when she saw the jacket in my hands. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whose jacket is this?" She raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of her wine. "Oh, that? I don't know," she said with a light laugh. "Maybe I picked it up by accident somewhere." Her response was flippant, almost dismissive. My chest tightened as I set the jacket down. "Sarah, seriously, where did it come from?" She shrugged, still smiling, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "I really don't know, Mike. Relax. It's just a jacket." Her words didn't reassure me. In fact, they made me feel worse. Something was off. Her tone, her body language, the way she seemed eager to brush off the question. I wanted to push further, demand a real explanation, but something in her expression stopped me. It was as if she was daring me to keep asking. Instead, I nodded and walked out of the room, the jacket still sitting there like a silent accusation. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Sarah, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and questions. Was I overthinking it? Was there a perfectly innocent explanation for the jacket? Or was this the first crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew? I didn't have the answers. Not yet. But I was determined to find out. The next morning, Sarah was already awake by the time I got out of bed. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she brewed coffee. The jacket was gone. I glanced around the room, searching for it, but it was nowhere to be seen. "Morning," she said brightly, handing me a mug. Her demeanor was so normal, so effortlessly cheerful, that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the unease from the night before. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Did you do anything with that jacket?" She looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. "Oh, I must have put it in the laundry pile. It smelled funny." She laughed lightly and returned to scrolling. The laundry pile, of course. Except I'd checked the pile before heading to bed the night before, and it wasn't there. At work, I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to the jacket and Sarah's odd behavior. Her response didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. The casual dismissal, the deflection. I knew Sarah better than anyone, and something about her tone didn't feel genuine. During lunch, I called my best friend, Chris. He'd known Sarah almost as long as I had, and he was one of the few people I could trust with this. "Hey, man." I started, my voice low. "Can I ask you something weird?" "Shoot," Chris replied. "Would you think it's crazy if I said I'm suspicious of Sarah? Like, maybe something's going on." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, something?" I told him about the jacket. How it wasn't mine, how Sarah had brushed off my questions, how she seemed almost too calm about the whole thing. Chris sighed. "Look, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but that doesn't sound great. Do you think she'd, I don't know," I admitted, "but it doesn't feel right. What do I do, man?" I don't want to accuse her if I'm wrong, but I can't ignore this. Well, if it were me, Chris said carefully, I'd keep an eye out. Don't confront her unless you have more to go on. But don't let it slide either. That evening, I came home with a plan. I needed to know the truth, and I wasn't going to let my doubts fester any longer. Sarah was in her office when I got back, her headphones on as she worked on one of her designs. I took the opportunity to search the house, my heart pounding with every step. I checked the laundry pile first. Nothing. The jacket was gone. I moved to the closet, the spare room, even the garage, but there was no sign of it anywhere. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. When Sarah came out for dinner, I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. If the jacket wasn't here, where had it gone? And why had she lied about putting it in the laundry? That night, I made a decision. If Sarah wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd find it myself. After she went to bed, I ordered a set of discreet cameras online. I felt a pang of guilt as I clicked purchase, but I pushed it aside. I had to know. I couldn't shake the feeling that the life we'd built together was slipping through my fingers, and I wasn't about to let it happen without a fight. The cameras arrived 2 days later. I felt a mix of relief and unease as I opened the package, pulling out the tiny devices. They were so small, so discreet, it was hard to believe they could capture anything meaningful. But I wasn't taking chances. I waited until Sarah went to bed that night before installing them. My hands trembled as I worked, the weight of what I was doing pressing down on me. It felt wrong, spying on my wife, invading the privacy of our own home. But the alternative, the not knowing, was worse. I placed the cameras in key spots around the house. The living room, the kitchen, her office. I even hid one in the bedroom, a decision that made my stomach turn. What if I found something I didn't want to see? What if I was wrong? By the time I finished, it was nearly 2 a.m. I stood in the darkened living room, staring at the glowing indicator light on my phone that showed the cameras were live. For a moment, I considered shutting it all down, pretending none of this had happened. But the image of that leather jacket flashed in my mind, and my resolve hardened. I needed answers. The next morning, Sarah was unusually affectionate. She made pancakes, her laughter bright and carefree as she joked about me looking tired. I forced a smile, playing along, but every word felt like a lie. If she noticed my stiffness, she didn't say anything. When I left for work, I checked the camera feed from my phone in the parking lot. The house was quiet. Sarah was in her office, headphones on, completely absorbed in her work. It was almost enough to make me feel foolish for doubting her. But then, around noon, everything changed. The feed from the living room camera showed Sarah pacing nervously by the front door, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She kept glancing out the window, her movements tense and jittery. A few minutes later, a car pulled into the driveway. A sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed. He carried himself with a casual confidence that made my stomach churn. Sarah opened the door before he could even knock, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. They hugged. Not the quick, friendly kind of hug you'd give a coworker or a neighbor. This was different, intimate, lingering. My chest tightened as I watched them move inside, Sarah closing the door behind them. For the next hour, I sat in my car, glued to the screen. The man followed Sarah into the kitchen, where they laughed and talked in hushed tones. She poured him a glass of wine, her smile soft and familiar. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in ages, and it wasn't meant for me. Then they disappeared into her office. Couldn't breathe. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as I tried to process what I was seeing. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, the image of Sarah and that man replaying in my mind like a nightmare on a loop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way she smiled at him. The way her body language spoke volumes about a closeness I hadn't seen in years. When I got home that evening, Sarah was waiting for me with dinner on the table. She was wearing one of my favorite dresses, her makeup subtle but flawless. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, but I could barely taste it as we ate. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone casual, her eyes warm and inviting. Busy, I replied, forcing a smile. Yours. Just work, she said, sipping her wine. Nothing exciting. The lie felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I held back. I wasn't ready, not yet. After dinner, Sarah retreated to the living room to watch TV, her laughter filling the house as she binged some sitcom she loved. I pretended to do paperwork at the kitchen table, but my focus was on the footage from earlier. I watched every second of their interaction, my anger building with each passing moment. It wasn't just the way they looked at each other. It was the way he touched her. A hand on her back, a brush of his fingers against hers as they talked. Small, subtle gestures that screamed intimacy. I fast-forwarded to the moment they left the kitchen. The camera in her office caught them entering, their conversation turning quieter, more serious. He leaned closer, his hand resting on the back of her chair. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into him. And then, they kissed. I paused the video, my hands trembling as the scene burned itself into my memory. It wasn't a fleeting kiss. It was slow, deliberate, full of a passion that used to belong to me. They didn't stop there. I couldn't watch anymore. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was a reality. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for 8 years, was cheating on me. I sat there in the dark, the weight of the truth pressing down on me like a stone. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, to shout, to rage, to demand an explanation. But another part of me, the part that felt like a wounded animal, knew I needed to think this through. She was sitting just a few feet away, laughing at the TV, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I fought to keep my composure. Later that night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind a chaotic swirl of anger and heartbreak. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we had made, the life we had built together. How had it come to this? By the time dawn broke, I had made my decision. The confrontation was coming, but not yet. I needed to be sure there was no escape, no way for her to twist the truth or deny what I had seen. I needed to corner her with the weight of her own lies. The next morning, Sarah acted as if nothing had changed. She hummed softly while pouring coffee, her smile warm as she set a cup in front of me. It felt like a slap in the face, this casual normalcy while I sat there drowning in what I knew. Got any big plans today? She asked, her tone light. Nope, I replied flatly, sipping my coffee. Just the usual grind. She didn't seem to notice the edge in my voice or the fact that I couldn't meet her gaze. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. Either way, it only fueled my determination. At work, I couldn't focus. My mind replayed the footage from the night before. Every second of their kiss etched into my memory. I hated that it hurt so much. I hated that I still cared. That afternoon, I called Chris again. I didn't give him all the details, but I told him enough to get the advice I needed. Man, you've got to confront her, Chris said. What are you waiting for? I need her to admit it, I said. I need her to tell me the truth. If I just accuse her, she'll deny it. I know her. Chris sighed. So what's your plan? You're not just going to sit on this forever, are you? No, I said firmly. I'm going to push her. I just need to time it right. That evening, I came home to find Sarah in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up as I walked in, her smile bright but hesitant. Hey, how was work? Fine, I said, keeping my tone neutral. How about you? Anything interesting happened today? Her hands paused for a fraction of a second before she resumed chopping. Not really, she said with a shrug. Just the usual. It was a small hesitation, barely noticeable, but it set off alarm bells in my head. I decided to test the waters. By the way, I said casually, that jacket I asked about the other day, did you ever figure out where it came from? She laughed, her tone forced. Oh, that? I think I must have donated it with some other stuff. You know how I hate clutter. Her response was smooth, almost too smooth. My chest tightened as I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. Good idea, I said. Clutter's the worst. That night, I watched the live camera feed again. The man didn't show up this time, but Sarah's behavior was odd. She spent most of the evening on her phone, pacing the living room with a look of concentration on her face. Occasionally, she'd glance toward the front door, as if expecting someone. My heart pounded as I watched her. Was she planning something? Was she waiting for him? The next day, I took the afternoon off work and drove to the electronics store. If I was going to confront Sarah, I needed more than just the cameras. I purchased a small voice recorder and slipped it into my pocket, feeling a strange mix of guilt and resolve. When I got home, Sarah was out running errands. I used the opportunity to search the house again, going through drawers, closets, even her laptop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be more. I found it in her email. It was a single message, buried deep in her inbox. From unknown sender. Subject: last night was perfect. Message: can't stop thinking about you. Same time next week? My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. There was no name, no signature, just the damning words that confirmed everything I feared. I forwarded the email to myself, my hands shaking. When I heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway, I quickly closed the laptop and returned to the kitchen, my mind racing with how I would use this. The pieces were falling into place, and I was ready to make my move. Sarah walked into the house with her usual energy, juggling shopping bags and humming softly. "Hey, Mike!" she called as she set the bags down on the counter. "I picked up that fancy coffee you like. Figured you could use a pick-me-up." I forced a smile, my stomach churning. "Thanks. That's thoughtful." She glanced at me as she unpacked the groceries, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You okay? You seem off." "Long day," I said, leaning back against the counter. "You know how it is." Her gaze lingered for a moment before she nodded, turning back to the groceries. "Well, I'm making pasta tonight. Your favorite." Her casual demeanor only deepened the ache in my chest. I wanted to shout, to throw the email and the footage in her face, but I needed to keep my cool. Not yet. After dinner, Sarah retreated to the living room, her phone in hand. I stayed behind, pretending to clean up while watching her from the kitchen. She was smiling at her screen, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I clenched my fists, the anger boiling just beneath the surface. This was it. I couldn't hold back any longer. I walked into the living room, leaning casually against the doorway. "Hey, Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, startled. "Yeah, we need to talk." Her smile faltered. "What about?" I held up my phone, the email pulled up on the screen. Her eyes darted to it, and I saw the color drain from her face. "This," I said, my voice low. "Care to explain?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. "Mike." Where did you get that?" "That's not the question," I said, my voice rising. "The question is, who is he?" She stood, her hands trembling. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Sarah," I shouted, stepping closer. "I saw him. I saw you with him. And then I found this email. So stop pretending and tell me the truth." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words hit me like a freight train. I staggered back, running a hand through my hair as the weight of her admission sank in. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How long has this been going on?" She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I don't know. A few months. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just..." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't give me that 'it just happened' crap. You made a choice, Sarah. You chose to betray me." "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You've done a hell of a job." The room fell silent, her sobs the only sound. I turned away, staring out the window as I tried to collect my thoughts. The woman I had built my life with, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, had torn everything apart. And for what? Finally, I turned back to her. You need to leave, I said coldly. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Mike, please, let me explain. We can work through this. No, I said firmly. You've already made your choice. Now it's my turn. Sarah stood frozen, her tears streaking her face as my words sank in. Mike, she whispered, stepping toward me. Please don't do this. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I love you. We can fix this. Fix this. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You think this can be fixed? You lied to me. You betrayed me. And you expect me to just forget about it? I didn't mean for it to go this far, she pleaded, her voice breaking. It didn't mean anything. I swear. That's worse, I shouted, my anger boiling over. You destroyed us for something that didn't even matter? You threw away 8 years, Sarah. For what? She flinched at my words, her sobs growing louder. But I didn't feel pity. Not now. Not after everything. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to steady my breathing. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, I broke it. Who is he? I demanded, my voice cold. What? She stammered. Don't play dumb, I snapped, spinning to face her. Who is he? The guy in the black car. The one you kissed. The one you... My voice cracked, and I couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. His name is Andrew, she said softly. We met at a client event. The name meant nothing to me, but it didn't matter. It only made her betrayal feel more surreal, more disconnected from the life we'd built together. And how long has it been going on? I pressed. She hesitated again, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she debated how much to tell me. A few months, she admitted finally. Maybe 6 months. Half a year of lies, of deception, while I'd been blissfully unaware. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I staggered back, leaning against the wall for support. I trusted you, I said, my voice hollow. I gave you everything, Sarah. How could you do this? She stepped closer, reaching out to me. Mike, please. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I made a mistake, but we can get through this. Please don't throw us away. I pushed her hand away, the anger flaring again. Don't you dare act like I'm the one throwing us away. That was all you. You did this. You destroyed us. The weight of her betrayal hung in the air between us, suffocating and inescapable. I wanted to believe her, to think there was some way back from this, but the pain was too raw, too deep. Finally, I spoke. You need to leave, I said again, my voice cold and firm. Pack a bag and go. I don't care where, but you can't stay here. Mike, please, she sobbed, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the couch. I have nowhere to go. Don't do this. I love you. You should have thought about that before, I said, my voice ice. Now it's too late. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing behind me. Upstairs, I grabbed a pillow and blanket from the linen closet and set them on the guest bed. I couldn't bear to sleep in the same room as her anymore, let alone the same bed. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I felt the full weight of what had just happened. My marriage was in ruins, my trust shattered, and the life I thought I knew had been nothing more than a lie. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Normally, Sarah would be bustling around the kitchen, making coffee and humming softly. But today there was nothing. The weight of our confrontation hung heavy in the air, suffocating and inescapable. I came downstairs to find her sitting at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. Morning, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I ignored her, pouring myself a cup of coffee and leaning against the counter. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I didn't pack last night, she said finally, breaking the quiet. I turned to her, my jaw tightening. Why not? Because I don't know where to go, she admitted, her voice trembling. I messed up, Mike. I know that. But I don't want to leave. This is our home. Our home, I repeated, laughing bitterly. You mean the home you've been sneaking other men into while I've been at work? That home. She flinched, tears filling her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Stop saying that, I snapped, slamming my mug down on the counter. Sorry doesn't fix this, Sarah. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to calm down. But the anger was overwhelming, bubbling just beneath the surface and threatening to spill over. You don't get to play the victim here, I said finally, my voice cold. You made your choice. You betrayed me. And now you're going to face the consequences. I know, she said, her voice breaking. But Mike, please, I can't leave. Not like this. Let me stay until I figure something out. Please. Her plea caught me off guard. For a moment I considered telling her no, forcing her to leave right then and there. But as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Fine, I said reluctantly. You can stay, but only for a week. After that, you're gone. She nodded, her tears falling freely now. Thank you, she whispered. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sarah stayed in the bedroom, the door closed and locked, while I busied myself with chores around the house. It felt strange, walking through the home we'd built together, knowing it was all falling apart. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to the email, to the footage, to the way she had looked at him. The betrayal was like a knife in my chest, twisting with every passing moment. That evening, as I sat in the living room, Sarah emerged from the bedroom. She looked hesitant, her eyes red and swollen. Can we talk? She asked softly. I stared at her for a moment before nodding. Fine. Talk. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she began. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I still love you, Mike. I always have. And I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Make it right, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. How do you expect to make this right, Sarah? You think you can just apologize and we'll move on like nothing happened? No, she said quickly, her voice shaking. I know it won't be that easy, but I want to try. Please, Mike, don't give up on us. Her words should have meant something. They should have stirred something in me, but all I felt was emptiness. I don't know if I can do that, I said finally, my voice hollow. You've broken something I'm not sure can be fixed. Her tears fell again, but this time I didn't look away. I let her cry, let her feel the full weight of what she'd done. For the first time, I felt like I was the one in control. The next few days felt like a slow-motion collapse. Sarah stayed mostly out of sight, keeping to the bedroom or her office. The house felt quieter than it had ever been, the silence filled with unspoken accusations and the weight of her betrayal. I went through the motions of work and daily life, but my mind was always elsewhere. Each night, I sat in the guest bedroom staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our confrontation. Her tears, her pleas, they felt hollow now, echoes of the trust she had shattered. One evening, as I was going through some files on my laptop, I came across the forwarded email again. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. The words stared back at me, taunting me, a reminder of everything I had lost. I couldn't help myself. I began digging deeper. The email address didn't include a name, but a quick search led me to social media profiles, pictures, and eventually the man himself, Andrew. He was everything I wasn't. Confident, outgoing, always surrounded by people in polished photos. The more I looked, the more I hated him. Scrolling through his posts, I found pictures from events I didn't even know Sarah had attended. And then, buried deep in his timeline, I found a photo that stopped me cold. It was a picture of Sarah and Andrew taken months ago. They were sitting at a table in some dimly lit bar, leaning close, their faces illuminated by laughter. Her smile was wide, radiant, and completely unfamiliar. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was a relationship. The weight of it hit me all over again, crushing and relentless. I slammed the laptop shut and paced the room, my anger bubbling to the surface. I needed to confront her. I needed to hear her say it, to admit everything, to give me the answers I deserved. That night, after dinner, I found her in the living room. She was curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She didn't even look up as I entered the room. "Sarah," I said, my voice sharp. She turned to me slowly, her eyes wary. "What is it?" "We're not done talking," I said, crossing my arms. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded. "I know." I sat down across from her, leaning forward, my voice low and controlled. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" She hesitated, her eyes darting away. "I don't know," she whispered. "You don't know?" I repeated, my anger rising. "You don't know how long you were going to lie to me? How long you were going to sneak around behind my back?" Her tears started again, but this time they didn't move me. "I wasn't thinking," she said, her voice breaking. "I was selfish, and I wasn't thinking." I stood up, pacing the room. "What else aren't you telling me? Is Andrew the only one, or have there been others?" She gasped, shaking her head violently. "No, Mike, I swear. It was just him. It's over now." "Over?" I laughed bitterly. "It's not over, Sarah. It's never going to be over. You've destroyed everything. You think that just goes away because you say it's done?" Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I don't know what else to say." "Don't say anything," I snapped. "Your words mean nothing to me anymore." The room fell silent, her cries the only sound. I stared at her, feeling nothing but emptiness. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had stolen everything we'd built together. Finally, I spoke. "You still have a few days to figure out where you're going. After that, I don't want to see you here again." She looked up at me, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Mike, please." "No," I said firmly, cutting her off. "You made your choices, Sarah. Now you get to live with them." Sarah retreated to the bedroom, her sobs echoing faintly down the hallway. I sat in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind churning with the events of the last few days. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The image of her with Andrew kept flashing in my mind, her smile, the way she leaned into him. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that she had found joy with someone else while I was left in the dark. That cut deeper than I expected. The next morning, I woke early, the sun barely peeking through the curtains. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the backyard. This house had been our dream, the place we'd planned to grow old together. Now it felt like a prison. Sarah came downstairs a few hours later, her steps tentative. She hovered near the doorway, clutching a mug of coffee like it was a shield. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice still hoarse from crying. I didn't respond, keeping my gaze fixed on the window. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Mike, I know I've hurt you. I know I've destroyed your trust. But please, can we talk about this? I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I turned to her, my expression blank. "There's nothing to talk about, Sarah. I've made my decision." "But..." "No," I said sharply, cutting her off. "You don't get to plead your case now. You had months to come clean, and you didn't. You chose him over me, over us. Now you have to live with that." Her face crumpled, and she sank into the chair across from me. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "Even when I was with him, I thought about you." I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that? You were sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, and now you want to tell me you were still in love with me? Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds?" She looked down, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Then don't say anything," I said coldly. "Just leave." The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Sarah stayed in the bedroom, packing her things, while I tried to distract myself with anything I could. I cleaned the house, went for a run, even mowed the lawn. But no matter what I did, The weight of her betrayal stayed with me. That evening, she emerged from the bedroom with a suitcase in hand. Her eyes were red, and her shoulders slumped as she set the bag by the door. "I'll stay at a hotel for now," she said quietly. "I'll figure something out." I nodded, unable to look at her. She lingered by the door, her hand resting on the knob. "Mike," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't respond. With a shaky breath, she opened the door and stepped outside. I watched from the window as she loaded her suitcase into the car and drove away, the taillights disappearing into the night. For the first time in days, the house was completely silent. No tears, no arguments, just emptiness. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the spot where she had been, and felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. It was over. The days after Sarah left were quiet, too quiet. The house, once filled with laughter, conversation, and shared memories, now felt like a hollow shell. Each room was a reminder of what we'd lost, of what she had destroyed. I went through the motions. Work, errands, sleep, repeat. But everything felt heavier, slower, like I was wading through molasses. My friends reached out, offering their support, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. How do you explain that the person you trusted most turned your life into a lie? One evening, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the box of Sarah's things she'd left behind. It was filled with small, meaningless items. Candles, photo frames, trinkets from vacations we'd taken together. I picked up one of the frames, a picture from our honeymoon in Hawaii. In the photo, Sarah and I were smiling, her arms wrapped around me as we stood on the beach. We looked happy, genuinely happy. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how that version of us had become this. With a sigh, I put the photo back in the box and pushed it aside. It was too soon to throw it away, but I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The next morning, Chris stopped by unannounced, his usual grin replaced with a look of concern. "You look like hell," he said, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table. "Thanks," I muttered, sipping my coffee. "I mean it, Mike. You can't keep bottling this up. Talk to me." I hesitated, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Finally, I told him everything, the jacket, the cameras, the email, the confrontation. By the time I finished, Chris was shaking his head, his expression a mix of anger and sympathy. "She's a piece of work," he said. "But you did the right thing, man. You stood your ground." "It doesn't feel like it," I admitted. "It just feels empty." "That's normal," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But you'll get through this. You're stronger than you think." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I redecorated the house, rearranging furniture and adding new pieces that felt like mine. I joined a local gym, spending my evenings working out instead of wallowing in the past. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering what went wrong. But slowly, the weight began to lift. One day, while cleaning out the guest bedroom, I found the voice recorder I had used during my investigation. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. Did I really want to relive all of that? After a long moment, I set it aside, unopened. I didn't need it anymore. I had the truth, and that was enough. The next time Sarah called, I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice tentative and filled with regret. "Hi, Mike. It's me. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I've been thinking about you, about us. I'm so sorry for everything I did. I hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't call her back. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to take on a new rhythm. The pain of Sarah's betrayal didn't disappear, but it dulled over time, becoming less of a raw wound and more of a faded scar. I learned to navigate the quiet, to reclaim the spaces in the house that had once been filled with memories of us. One Saturday, while sorting through a stack of mail, I came across an envelope with Sarah's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to open it. Finally, curiosity won. Inside was a short letter. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this.
I'm sorry.
For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, the pain I caused you. I've been in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did, and all I can say is that I was selfish and scared. You didn't deserve any of it. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I know I can't fix what I broke, but I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Take care of yourself. Sarah. I folded the letter and set it aside. It didn't change anything, but there was a strange sense of closure in her words. One day, while walking through the park, I bumped into an old coworker, Lisa. We hadn't spoken in years, but the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about work, life, and everything in between, and for the first time in a long time I found myself laughing. Over the next few weeks, Lisa and I started meeting for coffee. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people enjoying each other's company. It was refreshing, like a breath of fresh air after months of suffocating under the weight of my past. The house began to feel like home again. I replaced old pictures with new ones, redecorated the living room, and finally got around to fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen. It was my space now, and I took pride in making it my own. Chris stopped by one afternoon and surveyed the changes with a nod of approval. "Looks good," he said. "You're doing okay, aren't you?" "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with the truth in my words. "I think I am." On a quiet evening, I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I was learning to let go, to move forward, to rebuild. Sarah's betrayal had taken so much from me, but it hadn't taken everything. I still had my life, my future, and the strength to start over. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, I raised my glass in a silent toast, to resilience, to growth, and to whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. If you like our content, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.